Today on Focus on Business, we're going to be talking about the smoking hot issues that business owners are dealing with because of new legislation on minimum wage, paid leave, new taxes, and of course, the new marijuana law.
Good morning, I'm Rob Fowler, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. Welcome to Focus on Business. I'm joined by the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, Brian Calley. Brian, welcome to the association, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you as my partner in sort of this small business endeavor.
What a natural place it is to be. I mean, small business is such an important and vital part of our economy here in Michigan. It's been a really important part of my life, literally since the very beginning of my professional career. It's like a full circle opportunity to be involved in something really special.
Well, and for those who might not recognize you, you've just come off of 8 years as the Lieutenant Governor of Michigan, and so delighted to have you. One of the questions that we want to sort of take up in this show is, having an effect, how can small business sort of affect public policy in our state? And as a former member of the House of Representatives and former Lieutenant Governor, I think you have a unique insight on the impact that a small business owner can actually have on the process.
You know, a lot of people think it's just such a big process. It seems so far removed from regular people. How could I possibly have an influence on it? Small business owners have a really important voice and can impact policy in a very major way. And it's about relationships. Think about the way that small business owners run their business. There's so much about it. It's relationships. It's the same thing when it comes to impacting public policy. So knowing your representatives, knowing your senators, reaching out, registering that opinion, letting them know what you think about it. Keep in mind that small business owners, as you would well know, are leaders in the community. They're people that have great reputations, people that are vested, that are a part of the important things happening in the community. When that voice reaches out, even a single phone call or email to a policymaker, a legislator, can have an impact on the overall direction of that policy.
Well, I think a lot of small business owners think that it takes 100 phone calls or 1,000 phone calls or 100 letters to their lawmaker. As a former member of the House of Representatives, what kind of impact could a business owner make?
Business owners, especially small business owners that are important, that are ingrained into the local community, like most of them are, they're considered experts by lawmakers. They're people that really know the subject matter. They know how this really impacts things, and that's why I would really encourage people to not shy away from being involved, but to make the case to the legislator directly.
So weigh in, get involved. You can really make a difference just simply by contacting your lawmaker. Thank you, Brian, and thank you for joining us today.
I'm Lisa Smith, and this is Focus on Business. Today we're talking about the issues, the smoking hot issues that small business owners are dealing with. The new marijuana law, paid sick leave, minimum wage, and the new tax laws. Joining me, Brian Calley, president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, Denise Policella, founder and managing partner of Cannabis Attorneys of Michigan, and Katie Hamilton, tax principal at Maynor Custerison. Katie, we're going to talk about the sexiest topic first, and that's the new tax laws. What are the tax law changes that businesses need to be aware of?
I don't know if anyone's ever referred to them as sexy outside of this, but I would say there's quite a few. Obviously, the tax law that was passed, or the tax regulations that were passed in December of 2017, basically were the largest. It was the largest tax overhaul in a generation. So there are a lot of changes. From a business perspective, one of the first items would be that any corporate tax-paying entity is now subject to a 21% rate, which it used to be a 35% rate. Any flow-through entity, of course, will be picked up on an individual's income tax return, and there is now a 20% deduction eligible to offset that income on the individual's tax return. So what that means is if there is an operating entity, and I believe a lot of the small businesses that are treated as a pass flow entity, they, at the individual level that reports that income, that individual has the ability to take a 20% deduction off, setting that income that's flowing through as long as that individual has other taxable income. In the tax world, we often say, in general, because there's always exceptions or exceptions to the exceptions, so that would be the in general answer. There are some industries that don't necessarily receive that 20% deduction, but there's also phase outs, so they might still qualify even if they fall under one of those categories of businesses that don't count. In addition to that, they've expanded depreciation, so there's the ability to take upfront bonus or Section 179 depreciation. It used to be 50% for bonus, and now it's 100%. It used to only be on new assets. Now it can be new and used assets. There is a couple of small things that might have been on the downside. Entertainment, client entertainment used to be 50% deductible for businesses, and now that is no longer deductible. And then additionally, one of the topics that we've had a lot of conversations with recently would be that historically individuals are allowed to take or corporations are allowed to provide an individual with free parking, fringe benefit, for the most part in general, again. And now there is a portion of taxpayers or business taxpayers' income that will no longer be deductible if they are providing that fringe benefit to an employee. So there's a lot more than that.
Well, you explain it well, and I don't know what's not sexy about that personally. I found it fascinating when we were doing tax planning this year that for the first time we were thinking about whether or not to take a deduction because we wanted to maximize the 20%. And so it's really it's a different conversation with your accountant today than it has ever been before. And I welcome it, of course. So small businesses are flow-through entities, and ultimately that money is going to be reported on the personal return. What can individual owners that have to deal with that flow-through expect on their return this year?
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest surprises will be at the individual level will be the complexity, I think, realistically, of the reporting. So even as recently as January of 2019, there was regulations, the final regulations were passed on that flow-through deduction. So there is, from a reporting standpoint, you need to know the income itself that's flowing through. You need to know the wages and what's being allocated to each owner. You will also need to know what the basis and the assets would be that will be reported. So calculating the deduction certainly won't be as simple as you think. There's also loss limitations now that you're only, if you have an entity that has a loss, with the exception of the 20%, there's only so much of a loss that you can take in that current year and everything else carries forward, where historically you would be able to offset all of or almost all of your income or whatever income you had up to the amount of that loss in the current year. Now, if you have other activities that have income and you have a large loss business, you won't be able to do that. From a general individual standpoint, beyond just the small business owners that, regardless of the deduction, I guess I will say, from an itemized standpoint, there was, I had a lot of phone calls I made in December of 2017 telling people that the standard deduction was changing and that they should hurry up and pay their mortgage payment and pay their property taxes and do their charity, because I've been having people this year report to me, I owe a lot more than I expected to, because a lot of those deductions are now gone.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Brian, we're going to talk about what's happened in legislation. Michigan adopted minimum wage and paid sick leave legislation recently. Let's talk about the sick leave first. As former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Michigan, now President of the Small Business Association of Michigan, you have had a track record of supporting small businesses, and we sincerely appreciate that. Can you tell us what this new sick leave policy means to employers? What are the specifications of the legislation, and then who is impacted by it?
Well, there have been some changes. So there was a policy adopted last fall, and then it was amended a few months later, and really amended for the better. The amendments really looked at the realities that small businesses face and molded the policy such that it recognizes the unique challenges that a small company with a relatively small staff would face living up to this original policy standards. So the basics of it are that that now there is in law a requirement that for every 40 hours, an hour of paid sick leave be added for employers and made available to employees. And that is, as it stands today, it puts it, Michigan, this new amendment to it does put it more in the mainstream of what you see happening in other states. But the big difference in the late in the legislative session in the policy that benefits small businesses is there is an exemption for those with under 50 employees. And that 50 employee threshold is one that is used very commonly in different laws with regulatory compliance issues, where small businesses that are operating underneath that type of size are exempted from the regulations that kind of generally apply across the board. So that was a good change to make, and one that definitely puts Michigan in a position to cultivate and support the environment for growth among small businesses.
Minimum wage. Minimum wage is going to increase. That is a gradual increase. Can you talk about how that's going to go into effect, and then the overall impact that you think it's going to have on the state?
Well, this has, of course, been a debate that has been raging for many years. What's the appropriate minimum wage? It's a national discussion, but it's also been one that's ongoing here in the state of Michigan. This new proposal that was adopted last fall and again amended very late in the legislative session, it puts in place a couple of things. First of all, it's a gradual increase in minimum wage between now and 2030. It'll go up to $12.05 by 2030. Previously, there was a thought of just attaching it indefinitely into the CPI. This legislation, the Consumer Price Index, this legislation just put specific amounts per year up to $12.05 by the year 2030. That is that was a change really made to give more direct certainty to what businesses can plan for in the future, as opposed to wondering what will inflation be. The other thing was the tip wage was restored. I think with the best of intentions, that was eliminated before in some original an original proposal. But a lot of people who received tip wages said, "Listen, if I don't get the tip wage and I don't receive tips anymore, my income is actually going to go down, and I'd rather have the tip wage plus the ability to receive tips." And so that part was restored, and that was a good change to the legislation as well. So things are changing, but there was really a thoughtful and deliberative process that was carried out over the course of the last several months to try and take the original proposals, which were really tough on small businesses in particular, and to make some changes that took the edge off and maintain this climate for growth and success in our state.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Now to the smoking hot part of the show. Michigan has new laws around marijuana and use. Denise, as a business owner, in light of the recreational marijuana now being legal in Michigan since December, should I be worried about employees coming to work high? What can business owners do to prevent that? In other words, what rights do we really have as employers?
Okay, so yes, we've seen an absolute flurry in activity, of course, in Michigan with the legalization of marijuana recreationally after several years of it being decriminalized for medical purposes. Presumably, some of the people that voted for marijuana legalization were business owners, but I think that as business owners, all of us were always concerned about having a strong workforce and making sure that everybody comes to work ready and able to work. So you have the same exact rights you've always had. I think that when you get folks who are very much in favor of marijuana legalization, and particularly employees who are coming to work, they make the assumption that because marijuana is legal and now a legal good in commerce in Michigan, that they can have it anywhere. I encourage employers to look at it a lot like alcohol. Okay, it's legal, but you can, as an employer, still prohibit it on your property. Your employees still do not have any right to privacy on your property, on your business property. They can still be searched. including their cars in the parking lot. I encourage employees not to bring that to work, but I think employers need to make that very, very clear in their employee handbooks and in policies that make it clear to their employees, because that's fair. There is a lot of confusion about that right now, that employers have the same rights that they have always had with any other substance. You can test for it, and marijuana is not a protected class. So unlike, say, sex, gender, race, religion, people who use marijuana are not a unique protected class under federal or state law, so they don't have that discrimination issue. So yes, you can go ahead and prohibit it at work. Its use, possession, and being intoxicated or impaired at work.
And that's including people who claim to have to use marijuana as a medical relief in some way?
Right. So far, yes. There was and there still is some activity in the courts as far as declaring somebody who uses marijuana for medicine in response to something that would presumably be protected under the ADA, okay, a disability, as allowing them to use marijuana at work. People can use marijuana like they can use any other medicine. Okay, so whether or not an employer allows a person the accommodation of using marijuana at work is going to be not only up to the employer privately, but potentially, eventually, up to the courts. What we do know is that the majority of marijuana that is used as medicine right now is not smoked. So employees may be using it on their way to work, or maybe using it at home or on the weekends during their own time. We may see activity in the courts, however, at some point when this becomes a bigger issue. I think it's fair to say that many people that use marijuana and have turned to marijuana as medicine could be classified as disabled under the ADA and the comparable Michigan laws.
Fair enough. As an employer, can someone fire an employee for marijuana use or refuse to hire somebody because of marijuana use?
Yes. In a word, yes. The Prop 1, which now is called the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act, but Prop 1 makes it very clear that employers are not required to give any special protection to anybody for their use of marijuana. So yes, you can refuse to hire somebody because they use marijuana. You can do pre-employment drug testing. You can take adverse action against an employee for their marijuana use, and you can fire them for their marijuana use. The question is whether that's a wise idea anymore, okay? Knowing that it is going to be so widespread, knowing that it is legal now, is that a decision that an employer wants to make and potentially exclude a large portion of the qualified labor force? Again, I try to encourage employers to think about marijuana sort of the same way they think about alcohol in the workplace. Would you fire or take adverse action against any employee that had a drink last weekend? That may, I think we all live in a state that has a robust alcoholic beverage industry. I don't think that it would be a particularly productive use of an employer's policy to exclude everybody who has alcohol, ever. So, it's going to be an important decision for every employer to make. But it's also probably going to be a very impactful one. And they're going to need to think about who they may be excluding from their workforce if they make a decision that's so strictly anti-marijuana.
Talking about alcohol use versus marijuana use, very different testing methods. What about marijuana testing methods for whatever your employment policy is?
Right. So there weren't different testing methods, and I think that caused a lot of angst and problems in this transitional period that we've experienced for so long. The traditional testing that employers use can test alcohol in the bloodstream, correct, and other drugs in the bloodstream. But when you test for marijuana, its unique properties allows residual marijuana that is not THC, it's not the stuff that gets you high. It allows it to stay in your bloodstream for potentially weeks on end. So the types of traditional drug tests that employers were using were really testing whether a person had had marijuana sometime in the recent past. Again, probably not the best test for an employer if they're trying to figure out if a person is impaired right then, because most likely they're not. So what we do know is that we need to develop better testing, or simply stop testing in the workplace for marijuana use, considering it's a legal good in commerce. So, you know, we do have blood tests, and as far as our roads are concerned, there are several tests that are being they are being sampled right now, and they're being tested right now. Nothing's particularly accurate enough to put on the roadways, but they are trying to figure out a great saliva test that would be a roadside test. That may be something that in the future employers would have access to, as far as being able to test active THC, you know, and current marijuana use.
Many small businesses throughout Michigan, not just on the employee side, will have customers that may be partaking in marijuana use. Can you just give us a quick update on how we might deal with that?
Quite. So I think, again, because marijuana is legal recreationally, many patrons of businesses, bars, restaurants, you know, shopping centers, are going to make the assumption that they can use marijuana. And they're not necessarily wrong, because our smoke-free air law only covers tobacco use, does not cover marijuana. So knowing that you are on private property, and knowing that a business owner, anybody that owns, manages, leases property, can exclude marijuana use on their private property by their patrons, again, they have to make that decision for themselves, but they can do it. I would recommend, however, that if you're going to exclude marijuana use on your business property, that you're going to need a separate posting. Your smoke-free air law, your non-smoking sign is not going to cover it.
So we're going to see some new signage popping up in places?
We may have to, because business owners are going to have very awkward conversations if they don't sort of let their patrons know in advance that they're not allowing marijuana use on premises.
Well, maybe it's time to have a sign shop, right? Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today on Focus on Business. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for joining us. Listen, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. So if you, as a technology expert, had to identify the one thing that businesses should be really having on their radar screen today, what is that thing?
Well, it's a great question. A lot of people are thinking about latest technologies, and it's the latest device, the latest iPhone, the latest this, that, or whatever. None of that matters today. What really matters is this constant cyber attacks that we're under. Every single business is under a cyber attack every single day. What we see happening is phishing emails. Now think about it this way. A phishing email comes in, people look at it and go, oh, that's junk, and they delete it. But that phishing email with a link in it is designed to get somebody to click, and that's going to add some software to their machine, or they're going to have trouble on their device. So think about it this way. If someone was walking up to your house and they were trying to open the window or open the knob on the door, you're going to go, what the heck? And you're going to call the police or do something. Well, every single worker in your organization is getting these phishing emails, and it's just like that person coming up to the house. And so you need to arm yourself and be aware of this. It's happening in cyberspace. People don't think about it, but it's someone is trying to break into your organization.
So as a person that uses computers every day, every hour almost, I've heard this. I know that this is a real thing. Is it really happening so often that there are people inside companies that are just looking at these emails and saying, oh, I think I'll go ahead and click on that email from nowhere I've ever heard of before?
Right, so they're not doing that on purpose. What the bad guys are very good at is the social engineering aspect of that. They're experts at getting people to click. They make the message look like it came from Amazon, a package has arrived during the Christmas shopping season. They make the information look like it came from Apple. Hey, you got an invoice from Apple. Well, no, I didn't. Click. So it's that type of thing, and people are falling for that.
So they're getting smarter, they're getting better. All right,
Exactly.
so let's say it's just coming on my to-do list to take care of this cyber alert, right? What, as an owner or a manager or an executive, can I do to protect my company? How do
Yeah.
how do I go about
Right.
doing that?
So the first thing is to understand the threat, and it is real. 90% of all attacks happen through a phishing email. Successful attacks happen through a phishing email. So understanding that is step one. Understanding step two is to get the people trained. The users that are behind that computer need to be intelligent. They need to not click, think before they click, and we'll all be safe.
Well, I think that's great information. Thank you. We're going to see you every week, and we're going to get great tips from you on Focus on Tech.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
Focus on Tech, brought to you by Providence, making technology easier.
Patricia, you're on the National Cannabis Banking Coalition.
Yes,
That is fascinating.
it is.
It is. This is a subject that almost every business wants to be able to talk about around the water cooler at the party. They want to know a little bit about it. It doesn't always affect all of us, maybe. Let's talk a little bit about that, though. Let's first set it up. What is banking cannabis?
Banking cannabis is providing financial services, usually depository banking, for businesses that are state legal, so they are state licensed cannabis growers, providers, retailers, producers.
Is it legal to bank cannabis?
It is at the state level, it is not at the federal level.
Okay, so how does that impact someone that's trying to do some banking?
Well, banks are charged with anti-money laundering regulations and Bank Secrecy Act regulations. That is a problem because those are federal laws and federal regulations that we follow that require us to report to the federal agencies and law enforcement when there are activities that are federally illegal taking place and the monetary transactions that happen around those illegal activities, so that the federal government can evaluate and look at what potential crimes are taking place through the financial transactions.
How prevailing is this industry in Michigan? How does it affect the general business community?
I think that this is important to look at now because we are looking at the need to make sure that there are, as a solid commerce system, and removing this from a cash transaction society, but at the same time there are hurdles, and it does impact just about every community because there are businesses that are going to be engaging in this activity throughout the state.
Thanks for the information today.
Focus on Banking, brought to you by Michigan Bankers Associate.
Thank you for joining us on Focus on Business and the smoking hot issues that have arisen from the new legislation in paid leave, sick time, minimum wage, and marijuana laws. We'll see you next time.